all for participating in our TechNation Wednesday webinar series. We are thrilled with the great turnout today. We have over 160 pre-registered attendees. TechNation is proud to offer these free webinars as a way to educate and provide valuable information to the HTM industry. We'll offer 1 to 2 webinars a month on Wednesdays, focusing on pertinent issues to the biomedical, clinical engineering, and imaging service community. We always try to find the most dynamic speakers in the profession. We'd also like to mention that many of these same speakers and presentations are held at our biannual MD Expo. The next one is going to be March 29th through the 31st in Nashville, Tennessee. Please visit mdexposhow.com for more information. We have 2 Wednesday webinars coming up in November. On the 12th, Neil Blagman of RPI will present a primer on tabletop sterilizer repair and maintenance, sponsored by Replacement Parts Industries. And then on November 19th, Bill Bentley of AMX Solutions will present Introducing DR Retrofit for the AMX 4 Plus, sponsored by AMX Solutions. You can register for both of these at imtechnation.com/webinars. A few notes before we begin. Your participation today makes you eligible for 1.5 CE credits. A survey about today's presentation will appear on your computer screen immediately following the webinar. Once the survey is complete, we will email you your certificate with the CE credits within 1 week. If you do not receive the survey, please email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Earlier today, registrants were emailed a Webinar Wednesday workbook. If you did not receive a copy, you can download one by visiting imtechnation.com/webinars and clicking on today's presentation. During today's webinar, all lines will be muted, but you can submit questions during the presentation by using the questions feature on the dashboard on the right-hand side of the screen. If you have any difficulty, again, email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Okay, TechNation would like to thank our sponsor today, MediQuip Biomedical. MediQuip Biomedical is the nation's premier third-party service parts provider and depot repair center for HP Philips and GE Siemens patient monitors. They also provide quality pre-owned patient monitors for sale or rent. Please visit them at www.mediquipbiomedical.com for more information. Our presenter today is Frank Magnarelli of Clinical Technology Management. Frank has over 30 years experience developing and managing single and multi-hospital-based biomedical programs in the U.S. and the Middle East. His experience also includes managing service for medical device manufacturers. Frank is a regular contributor and a blogger to our TechNation website, as well as a speaker at the MD Expo. Frank, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you, John, and thank all you folks for attending. The purpose of today's seminar is to help all of you folks, and it's probably most of the people in this industry, find ways to get people within the hospital to move away from the heavy dependence on maintenance agreements. And I want to show you another method or another plan in order to do that. And most of you have been making the same old argument year after year that maintenance agreements are a waste of money. You can certainly save them money if you took over the maintenance on these devices. Nobody seems to want to listen to you. However, as Einstein is reputed to have said, trying to do the same thing year after year and the same old way and expecting different results is insanity. So it's time to give up on those old arguments, and it's time to make a new plan. Now, you could try this. You could hire this guy to dance on the roof of your hospital during a full moon, but it'd probably be just as effective as what you've been doing in the past. So what we're here to do today is to scratch the old plan you've been trying and move to Plan B. And this is what Plan B is going to look like. Here's the outline. First thing we want to do in Section 1 is we want to take a different view of technology. I know most of you have been focusing on the money you can save doing repairs. I want to focus on reliability and the savings by minimizing downtime in your institutions. The second section, and there'll be about 10 to 12 minutes on each of these sections, by the way. Second session, we want to look at maintenance contract pricing. What does it really cost the manufacturer when they give you a contract? What do their profit margins look like? And also, we want to look at that old rule of thumb that people in our industry seem to believe that a contract should cost between 10 to 15% of the replacement cost of the device. I want to explode that rule of thumb and try to get it off of people's agendas. Then the third section, we're going to put the first and second part together and show you how you can put those two together and make change, replace contracts, implement a program that does that. I'll show you what it looks like, and then the final step is when you begin maintaining the MRI, CT, and this other high-tech equipment. After each section, we will stop and have a question period. So build your questions on that section, and then we'll stop and give you an opportunity to ask them. First thing we want to do is I want to take a look back at technology, and I want to use the automobile industry as an example. This is the Ford automotive plant in the 1920s. What I want you to observe is how labor-intensive this is. Look at all those people involved in car making. It is just surprising. I sometimes think these guys are making pizza at Domino's, but this is a very labor-intensive business. The Ford engineers had designed things so that each person did a minimum amount of work, like this gentleman may mount a fender, add 2 screws, it goes on to the next person. Somebody else will tighten something, and the line just keeps moving that way. So again, as I said, it's incredibly labor intensive. And what that means when it's labor intensive and the jobs are simplified, if any one of these people who does this tightening and various functions, if any of them gets sick or doesn't show up, it's very easy to replace them. The consequence of that is the assembly line never stops and Ford keeps producing automobiles. Now, that's our labor-intensive days in the past. I want to move forward and take a look at the future. And in our future automobile plant, you'll notice it's not very labor-intensive. People are not doing the work. It's all done by robotic machines. Make that a little bigger. So, in fact, as you look through this plant, you won't see any people. And it is amazing the level of sophistication of these machines. Now, the problem with this is, unlike our Ford plant, if somebody got sick, it took a few seconds to replace them, and the line never stopped. In this modern assembly plant where it's robotics, if a robot gets sick, everything stops. And this is what I want you to focus on. With high-tech robotic-type equipment that takes the place of human labor, everything stops. So I want to refer now to a study that was done of General Motors. And what they did at General Motors, they studied the consequences of an automobile paint sprayer stopping. They wanted to look at the costs. And if you look, this is a car in an automated spray booth. These are the robots. And I don't know, there may be 5 or 6 of them. And you can see if you look through this back window, there's a whole row of cars behind that just waiting to move to this robotic paint sprayer. Now, they did the study to determine what the costs of the paint sprayer failure were. And it turns out, and it was shocking, over $3,000 per minute, $200,000 per hour. Now, that might sound ridiculous because most of us would think of, well, the paint sprayer failed, maybe we lost a compressor, that might be $200 or $300 and some labor to fix it. But that's only the cost of repair. The cost of failure of that $3,000 a minute means there are no cars coming off the production line. There's no revenue being generated. Not only when the paint sprayers fail, you not only have to purge the sprayer that's failed, but many other machines have to be purged too. You might have to stop machines that all have to be rebooted and restarted. You're also paying for the depreciation on your plant, electricity costs, air conditioning costs, and there is no revenue being generated during that period. So you wind up with a $200,000 per hour expense. It is expensive. And what I want to point out is downtime costs exceed repair costs. The conclusion that Howard Cooper, who did the study, came to was that engineers who focus solely on repair costs are likely to find themselves seeking other employment. And this is what I want to really focus on in this segment, is it's not the repair costs that are important to your institution, it's the lost revenue precipitated by downtime. So now I want to take a look back at healthcare. And if you look in a clinical lab in the 1900s, like our early Ford plant, it's very labor intensive. Now, I'm sorry I don't have a film of these guys, but it would be pretty boring, a bunch of guys looking into a microscope. But incredibly labor intensive. There are no automated machines in this laboratory. And to do, for instance, a blood cell count, many of you may have done it. You use an old-fashioned microscope. You put a swab on a slide, you dye it, and then you physically count the cells in each of these segments on this cytometer. That's the way you do a blood cell count. Now, the average technician could do a count in 30 minutes. That meant their productivity would be 2 per hour. And if you had a lab that needed to produce 60 blood counts an hour, you hired 30 people. If one of them got sick, instead of 60 counts an hour, you produce 68. Well, that's a drop of maybe 3 to 4%. Not a major loss to your institution or to your laboratory, and you're not going to have many doctors screaming about that. You're not going to lose a lot of revenue. However, as we move forward in the 1960s, Wallace Coulter came up with his magnificent particle counter, came up with the Coulter Model S, and the Model S would do a count in 1 minute. If you needed it, that would replace 30 people, which would mean if you needed a count of 60 cell counts per hour in your laboratory, this machine would do it all in 1 hour at 1 minute per count. However, the problem is, like an automated automobile plant, when this machine goes down, everything stops. You don't lose 2 or 3%. You lose 100% of your output. And if you're getting $100 a count at 60 counts an hour, that's costing you $6,000 an hour right there while that machine sits idle. And it's not only the costs of revenue, the lost revenue when the machine goes down, but you've got a lot of angry doctors, and we all know they'll go storming up to the C-suite asking why they can't get their results. It also means you're going to get delayed or deferred diagnoses because you can't confirm them properly. You may be administering drugs based upon cell counts, and you can't do that. So a lot of other things are taking place in your institution above and beyond that $6,000 in lost revenue. And also, you've got to pay people overtime when that machine gets working in order to catch up. So a big, big loss. So we move away, if we look at our early lab that was very labor intensive, we look at the modern labs, and it's not unlike our modern automobile assembly line, with very few people and a lot of machines. And of course the consequence, like our auto assembly line, is when those machines go down, everything stops. So let's look at a few other pieces of equipment. This happens to be, actually that's an MRI machine. It's in my old hospital, Miami Children's Hospital. We like to make our equipment kind of like fun for the kids. But anyway, when the MRI goes down, you've got zero productivity, zero results, no revenue. You're going to have to reschedule patients. You'll have to reschedule overtime for techs. And in a kids' hospital, we had to anesthetize all the children to get them to lie still for the period they would be in the MRI donut. And that meant you also had to have the nurse anesthetist handy, nurses, and other kinds of people that also have to be rescheduled. So let alone the revenue of an hour's revenue that might be lost, which would be about $10,000 an hour, all the other things you have to do when that goes down. So we talked about lab equipment, the same when that fails, no productivity, no results, no revenue, overtime for techs, all kinds of things happening, upset physicians, delayed results for patients. And it's not limited to laboratory and imaging departments. Many of you have seen the ISTAT devices that have been proliferating for a number of years now in intensive care units. A nurse or a doctor can merely put a few drops of blood in this cassette, insert it in the analyzer, and under 2 minutes they can get complete blood results. Now, What that means is you no longer have to send results down to the lab. You improve your efficiency of your operation. You also can medicate your patients immediately instead of having to wait for results. So you've got better patient outcomes, reduced patient stays. So you can see the impact of this one device, although it's not a revenue generator, it has an impact on the entire way the intensive care unit operates and the patient outcomes. So there's a world of difference here. So finishing up on this segment, technology has to be reliable for a lot of reasons. Productivity in your hospital, the efficiency of its operation, the quality of care, staffing patterns change because of technology, patient outcomes improve, and revenue generation. And I put question marks. I don't know what else is affected, but you could probably find 50 other things that technology does for your institution. Point is, we can't turn back the clock. And as Howard Cooper said, engineers who focus solely on repair costs are likely to find themselves seeking other employment. I doubt that you will wind up seeking other employment, but if you stay focused only on repair costs, it's difficult for the C-suite to perceive you differently. But when you start looking at the costs the way I presented them in this segment, you will see a very large difference in how you are perceived. So that's the end of this segment. Do you have any questions, John? Or John, are there any questions?
Frank, at this point, there are no questions, but attendees, please feel free to use the portion on the right-hand side of your screen to ask questions at any point, and then we'll have questions and answer sessions after each section. So at this point, Frank, we have no questions. You can continue.
Okay, we're going to move on to section 2, and that deals with maintenance agreement pricing. What should a maintenance agreement cost? What's it cost the vendor? And first thing I want to do, I always go back to the automobile industry. I'm not sure exactly why. But we want to talk about the power of information. You know, one of the things, we all love to get a new car, but one of the things we hate to do is to go in and have to negotiate with the automobile dealer. And this handsomely dressed gentleman. The problem with negotiating for an automobile is these salesman holds all the cards. We go in loaded up. We might get our Kelley Blue Book. We get some information from the internet of what people think we should be paying. But the reality is the dealer has all the cards. He knows exactly what he paid for that car. He knows what it's costing him a day to keep it on the lot. He knows if you finance through him, what percentage of finder's fee he's going to get for the financing. And you're sitting there just with vague information. So that's why I'm talking about the power of information. Now, what happens with medical device maintenance agreements, service contracts? Manufacturers hold all the cards. They know exactly what their maintenance agreements costs. We don't. All we have is the equivalent of the Kelley Blue Book, this old 10 to 15% rule of thumb that says if we buy $1 million scanner, we should pay between $100,000 and $150,000, which would be 10 to 15% of the purchase price of that device. We should pay $100,000 to $150,000 for a maintenance agreement on that device. Well, if we knew the manufacturer's costs, we might be in a far better position to deal with that. And I want to show you a way we can know manufacturer's costs. I want to take a step back in time to the 1960s. Back in the 1960s, I was in service management at American Optical's medical division. Many of you may not even be aware they had a medical division, but at that time, they were one of the leading manufacturers of medical devices. And of course, as you can see, they were pretty crude devices. This gentleman, by the way, is Dr. Bernard Lown. Bernie was, he worked with American Optical on the development of the Lown cardioverter, and of course many of you are familiar with your defibrillator waveform, the famous Lown waveform, developed in our laboratories up in Massachusetts. But what I wanted to point out, back then one of my jobs in service management was to keep our warranty costs at 4% or below. That means for every $1 million in devices we sold, I was given $40,000 by the organization to maintain the warranty. That's actually 4% of sales, all right? So 4% of sales, $40,000 per million. That is known as the warranty accrual rate. That also meant that if I could hold the failure rate that we had during the warranty period into the second year, and my costs were going to stay at $40,000 per million, if I sold you $1 million worth of equipment and I got a $100,000 maintenance agreement, which would be that 10% rule of thumb, I made $60,000, which is a pretty nice piece of change. And it's certainly, if you can make $60,000 on every $40,000 investment, you're going to have a fantastic business. But anyway, what I want to point out, back then, our accrual rate was 4%. Now, many of you may remember these old circuit boards. They had these transistors sitting in TO5 cans, those old-fashioned glass diodes that had to be, the leads had to be bent and pushed through the pinholes on the boards. You had relatively high wattage resistors that would heat up and pop. Had card edge connectors that loved to plate and get noisy. The circuit boards, in fact, you can see on this particular circuit board, there are jumpers that have been installed after the fact. You had wave soldering and little bubbles would accumulate in these holes and eventually cause a few of the solder joints to go bad. But what I want to point out is the equipment back then compared to today was inherently reliable. But still at that time, we set aside 4% for warranty on these devices. Now, things have changed dramatically in terms of reliability and warranty costs. Today's warranty accrual rates are much, much lower. And part of the reasons are we've had in the, excuse me, in the 1980s and 90s, we adopted some of Edwards Deming's quality methodologies, the TQM programs, process improvement. We've had automated manufacturing techniques, no more people bending leads and sticking them in boards. They're all done in a fully automated fashion. We've got surface mount, which is intensely reliable soldering. We've got large-scale integrated circuits, laser trimmed, made under the most heavily controlled conditions. And most recently, companies have started adopting Six Sigma manufacturing techniques, which means that your devices are statistically free of defects, 3.4 defects per million. And to give you an indication of what Six Sigma manufacturing means to a manufacturer is, in 5 years, as it says at the bottom here, General Electric took CT tube life from 25,000 scans to 500,000 scans. That is a remarkable improvement in reliability. And this is according to Jack Welch, who was the former CEO of GE. So you can see things have changed dramatically. So what do manufacturers set aside for warranty costs today? This chart comes from a company called Warranty Week that gets their data from companies. They read the company reports and they look at the money they set aside for warranty. And you can see in 2003, there was less than 1% of the money that manufacturers were setting aside, less than 1% per million. And now, in 2013, they set aside 0.7% per million. That means $7,000 per million in sales. Just a little more about this chart. The green line represents the monies that they set aside to cover their warranty based on their projections, their engineering projections, and experience. The red line is their actual experience, and you can see how beautifully that tracks. They're right on. Their predictive software is incredible. So they don't make mistakes in this. Anyway, they set aside $7,000 per million in sales. That means that if they can hold that failure rate into the second year, and they send you a maintenance agreement, sell you a maintenance agreement at 10% of costs for $100,000, that means they make $93,000 on a maintenance agreement. That's heavy money, folks, very heavy money. But laser and X-ray equipment has a higher warranty accrual rate because, let's face it, they have a higher KV in the equipment. There are more opportunities for failure, and of course things like CT and others have a lot of moving parts. So opportunities for failure are great. But you can see even between 2002 and 2013, the failure rate or the warranty accrual rate is dropped to about 1.5%. So that means they're setting aside $15,000 per million in sales. I hope you're grasping this point because we want to use this later on in this talk. Very important point. So what this means in terms of manufacturers, their costs have fallen dramatically over the past 20, 30, 40 years. And although their costs are falling, we still use that same old 10 to 15% of the ratio, contract ratio, for maintenance agreements. So their costs are getting cheaper and cheaper, but they're still charging us 10 to 15% of replacement costs for a maintenance agreement. So if you look at a CT scanner where they can get $150,000 for a maintenance agreement, their warranty accrual is $15,000. Their profit's going to be $135,000. Big bucks. Anybody on earth who could invest 15 and get $135,000 back in a year is going to be a multimillionaire in a very short period of time. Now, according to Jack Welch, and this happens to be the book that he wrote straight from the gut after he retired from as CEO of GE's medical division, according to Jack Welch, their medical division was the profitable jewel of General Electric. Now, we know General Electric makes thousands of products, turbines, jet engines, all kinds of things. And yet their most profitable division is their medical division. And you can bet, although I can't prove it, but I'm willing to bet that the reason why those profits are so high is because of the money they're making on their maintenance agreement. So if you're a manufacturer and in that business, ka-ching, you've got great money coming in. So you can argue, you can say, well, gee, maybe there's a difference between warranty and non-warranty costs. But the reality is the equipment's the same, the users, everything is the same. Nothing changes. The same service tech, travel costs. And equipment, as we know today, doesn't fail that much with age as it used to. So the failure rate in year 2, when it's out of warranty, is very likely to be no different than year 1. But the difference is you're now paying the bill. That's the reason why your costs are so high. So I decided to take a look at other industries. And I go back to the automobile industry. You know those annoying people who try to sell you these automobile warranties? And I looked in Consumer Reports. The average automobile warranty costs $1,000. According to the National Automobile Dealer Association, average automobile costs $28,000, which means the average auto warranty costs 3.5% of the acquisition cost. And yet, in hospitals, you pay 10 to 15% of acquisition costs. Now, I used to live up in Maine, and I parked my old Buick outside in 15-degree weather, 15 below zero weather, I should say, drove it to work through snow, sleet, rain, potholes, mud season, and who knows what. And I could buy a warranty for 3.5% of my automobile acquisition costs. Now, your CT scanner sits in your hospital in this beautiful 72-degree controlled environment. It never gets sleet or rain or snow on it. I don't know of anyone who ever drove a CT scanner into a pothole, and yet they're charging you 3 times as much for a maintenance agreement as an automobile agreement. It just doesn't make sense. Now, I do know with an automobile, you've got to get it to the dealer. They don't send the mechanic out. That may be the primary difference between the two costs. So the other thing you can ask is the data I've shown you legit regarding warranty weeks data? Well, there's an accounting rule that financial statements must show their true profitability by showing all costs associated with product sales. So when they book profits in accounting, they have to show the cost of the device, which means the manufacturing, the production, the engineering costs, the commissions to salespeople, everything, including the warranty costs. So they have to show in the accounting rule. And I tell you this because I had a salesman from one company, the company begins with G, telling me that my data was wrong, and I pointed this out to him. The second thing, and more importantly, in 2002, as a result of the Enron scandal, Congress passed a legislation called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. Top management has to certify financial statements now, so your CEO and your CFO sign off on all financial statements saying this is true, the stuff in here. So this is warranty weeks data from the financial statements that they've signed off on. And the penalties, if they lie, are very severe, up to 20 years in prison and a $5 million fine. So I think you can trust this data. So are there any questions here on section 2 before we move into the next section, which will be how we use this data to move forward?
Frank, this is Jamie, and I have 3 questions for you that we need to address.
Certainly.
The first is, please speak to the issue of cost of training versus the number of pieces of equipment, comparing the cost of service contract to training cost.
Can I defer that, because we're going to show a little bit of that in the next section?
Absolutely.
All right.
The next question is maintenance cost. Is the estimate for 1 year? Is that correct?
That's right. That is their 1 year cost.
Okay. And last question that was submitted by our audience today, what is the failure rate percent for imaging equipment in the second and third of use?
And that I do not have off the top of my head, but we know that imaging equipment does fail at a slightly higher rate because of the mechanical apparatus. However, we also know that most strictly electronic devices don't seem to fail that much, especially a lot of the imaging equipment now that even electronic devices that are now on UPSs, which have a very reliable power coming in, and that's something, hopefully, I mean, we've all done for years now, is taking devices and put them on UPS so we can control the quality of power. But I don't have the data that shows. However, we know that it can't fail at twice the rate each year. That just doesn't happen, or the devices would be tossed out of the hospital.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have right now. I'll remind the attendees again, you can submit a question at any time using the dashboard on your right-hand side, but Frank, we are ready to move ahead. Okay,
let's move forward. So I've shown you that we want to focus on the costs of downtime. I've shown you a little bit of what manufacturers' costs are for these maintenance agreements. So now the question is, what do you do with this data? How do you make things change? Well, the first thing you got to do is get somebody's attention. Now, what I did and what I recommend you do is the one person who's 100% concerned with reducing costs in your institution is your chief financial officer. And in most cases, they have the weight in the organization to help you push this through. So what I would do, and what I did, was I took this to our CFO. I carried the flag. I met with him. I showed him this data, talked about profit margins. I can't tell you what he said because this is a public forum, but when he found out how we were being taken on contracts, sailors might have blushed when they heard what he had to say about that. And then you present your solution. Now, I put in orange. At this stage, you do not use this as an opportunity to service MRI and CT in-house. That will kill any plan you have. I can guarantee that. That does happen later, and we'll show you how to do that. So you present your solution. And what is your solution? One is you transition away from contracts. You start with equipment insurance for 3 years only. Now, I know a lot of people don't like insurance, and there's a couple of reasons why they don't, and we'll address those. But most people put insurance in as an end in itself. It is not an end in this program. It is only a transition, but it minimizes your risk during this period because they put a cap on your budget. They will automatically save you 20 to 25%. So if you're looking at $10 million in maintenance agreements, you're going to save $2 million off the top, which is not a bad piece of change. They will negotiate with your vendors for you and negotiate away the contracts. They'll work with the department heads to remove dependence on contracts. They capture data. They help you get to the true cost of maintenance. And then at the end of 3 years, you self-insure and self-manage. Now, I'll show you how they do that, how we make this happen. The first thing is step one, as I mentioned, maintenance insurance. But you want to make sure you manage it, not purchasing, not fiscal, no one but you, all right? Make sure you promote it as a transitional program. You're going to demonstrate cost savings and develop data. Now, you have to manage the insurance company as well. And one of the things you do to assure you bring the program in and minimize the hassle with department heads is you guarantee them that no service vendors will be, no service vendors will be changed without their approval. Because a lot of insurance companies like to come in and the first thing they do is start changing service vendors. We told department heads that will never happen without your approval. The only thing that changes is how you fund maintenance. And if you do that again, you're going to pick up 22 to 25% savings off the top. Now, how do you guarantee that? Well, you control the insurance company first by putting an RFP on the street. And an RFP is request for proposal. Your purchasing people will know how to do an RFP and put an RFP together, but you monitor it. You make sure that the RFP says you're asking for a 3-year agreement. The insurance company must use your numbering system, not theirs. They must negotiate and unbundle all contract agreements. Now, what is unbundling? The minute you try to drop a CT contract, the first thing that the company will say to you, well, you know, software's in there, which means you're going to have to pay $30,000 a year or something for software. The insurance company unbundles that. They put a value on the software and pull that out of the system and still drop the maintenance agreement. Also, much of your lab equipment is bundled. They have reagents, service, all kinds of things, upgrade in one service agreement. You have to pull all that stuff out. Most hospital people aren't skilled at that, but most insurance company people are because they know how to negotiate. And again, in your RFP, you want to have the department heads call in for service, and I'll show you how that works because our department heads loved it when we gave them that responsibility, and they are always involved in deciding whose services. And again, the reason why you want department heads to call in for service, many of these people want you to call their home office every time you need a service call, all kinds of things. You don't want that to happen. Let your department head call directly to the person with the problem. Step 1.5, don't go cold turkey. Don't try to do this all at once. We started small. I asked the CFO, who do you think we can work with to make this happen? He named 4 departments. We picked a few pieces of equipment in each department, imaging lab, cath lab, and the OR, and ironed all the bugs out of the system, made it work. Then we took the concept house-wide. I mean, we didn't do this with just medical equipment. We did every technology in the hospital, including IT, the telephone switch, the security department, all those security cameras, elevators, every technology we brought in under this program. In fact, the folks in the C-suite was shocked. I had a pretty good idea. IT's contracts exceeded all medical combined, and it certainly did. They were shocked when they found out the savings we were going to generate by bringing the IT department under this. Now understand, this doesn't mean we're servicing it. This means we are managing it, and there's a vast difference between managing something and fixing it. But this gives you an idea of, you know, Why would you want your security cameras? Well, look at the amount of technology in there and these mounts up there that sit out there in the bad weather. Get them off that expensive service agreement. The same with your elevators, your floor cleaning machines. They're all automated. Even your parking gates, you'll find in your hospital, much of that's probably under maintenance agreement. You can knock those off and save a great amount of money. Now, after 3 years, you move to self-management and you to self-insurance, and you buy stop-loss insurance. Stop-loss insurance is something with a very high deductible. If it looks like your costs are going to be $700,000 a year for maintenance, you'll hire an insurance company to pay you if you go over $700,000. They will reimburse you. Those contracts, the self-insurance contracts, are relatively inexpensive, and I'll guarantee your hospital already has a lot of stop-loss insurance for many of the agreements. Your CFO will know how to handle all that. Now, you become a partner with department heads. You continue managing, reporting annual and projected costs per device. You recommend capital budget replacement. You monitor vendor repair. You monitor PM completion. This is when you're proving your technical and your business managerial skills. Nothing to do with repair at this stage. So what are you giving department heads? Well, you're giving them cost reduction, reliability data. They're getting faster service because they call in for service. And we gave them purchase orders to do that, and I'll show you that in a minute. We gave them full control of the service process, budgetary assistance, because we would give them their annual budget repair projections, and that would be automatically passed through fiscal. If we gave them a number, they accepted it, fiscal bought it, which minimized their difficulty with their budget. This is what our service request form looked like. And I want to give you an idea. It had a PO number, and every department head was handed a pile of these with a unique purchase order number. They listed the device that needed service, the date and time it was requested, the date and time the technician arrived, and the date and time the repair was completed, and when it was satisfactorily completed. That's what the department head or the person requesting service from the vendor filled out when they contacted the vendor directly. This is a flow chart of what it looked like. The department would call in for service. They'd fill out the service request form. When the technician came in and did the repair, they'd marry the form to the service report. That came to our technical manager, who entered all that into our CMMS, waited for the service invoice from the vendor, and then they entered the dollars into the CMMS. They approved it, sent it to fiscal. Fiscal paid the bill. Now, I put in this dotted area. This was pivotal to vendors, because when vendors found out that we were approving the service invoices, they told the department heads, I will carry all this data, all this data over to your technical manager. That way they would sit with our technical manager in case we had any questions. It speeded up the payment process for them. So again, we developed much stronger rapport with our vendors through this process. It's a very simple flow process, and it worked very well. But here's what we could generate just from that amount of data. Downtime hours, the kinds of problems they saw. We could give them service cost projections for each device. As I mentioned before, capital replacement. We reviewed vendor performance, and we did that on each device and the total for the department in aggregate. We showed the elapsed time to service tech arrival, how long it took them to get there, how long it took them to complete the repair, the same day fixed rate, what the service charges are, how much was labor, how much was travel, how much was parts. Because people say, well, Jerry, I paid $5,000 for service. They might discover that $3,000 of that was travel time, and they really spent a lot of money for something they weren't getting. And again, you report that per device and aggregate. Now, I said at the end we were going to show you how to expand your services using all of this. First thing you do is you complete response time. You compute your response time. Let's say you had 5 service calls on your MRI. This is all very hypothetical. 5 service calls last year on your MRI. And it took the company 4 hours to show up, not to do the repair, just to get to you. That means you had 20 hours of downtime, 2.5 work days, and if you're doing patients, 2 patients an hour, 40 patients had to wait just for these guys to show up. Now, if you're generating $10,000 in revenue per hour on that device, that 20 hours of downtime means you're having revenue loss or deferred revenue of $200,000. That's a lot of money just waiting for somebody to show up. And then you have to talk about, you're going to have to calculate overtime in there to make up the schedule. How do you reschedule 40 patients? That's a lot of patients to squeeze into other locations. And I realize that 20 hours isn't all at once, but when they look at it in aggregate, it is an awful lot. They've got rescheduling problems, the inconvenience to the patients, physician issues. Now, if you say, I will be happy to take first call on this, I can reduce that 20 hours of downtime, and if I guarantee to be there in 5 minutes, that 20 hours of downtime now becomes 25 minutes of downtime. And instead of $200,000 plus in lost or deferred revenue, you're going to lose $5,000. That's an incredible savings. And this had nothing to do with the money you saved on repair. That's why I showed you that information earlier on focusing on the costs of downtime as opposed to focusing only on repair costs. So you can save fantastic amounts of money just by taking first call. And it's very difficult now for a department head to argue with those kind of savings. Now, you're always, when you take first call, you guarantee a maximum of trouble time. That's the one thing you would do. You're not going to say that of troubleshooting time. You're not going to say, well, I'll look at it for an hour or two. You'll guarantee that you look at it for 15 or 20 minutes or whatever it is. And then if you can't handle it, you call the vendor. Now, you've got the record of what was failing in that device, so you can show them how many calls you would have been able to handle quickly in the past year because you've been accumulating that device in your CMMS. Now, also, you want to give an annual report to your C-suite. Your senior managers, you want to show them the total number of hours of downtime for the hospital. They're going to be shocked when they see that number. Show them how much of that number was just travel time. Then their first answer is going to be, well, why don't we have more in-house people doing this kind of work? I'll guarantee they will say that because they've never seen it broken down like that. No one has been truly managing maintenance and showing them the difference. And then tell them what all that travel time lost means in terms of efficiency for the institution. Then you can show them how much, and this is total in the hospital, was spent for parts, for labor, and travel. Again, travel time is something, if they have in-house people, they don't have to pay for. And there might be thousands and thousands of dollars in there. You can show them the year-to-year performance of your program, major successes, vendor performance, the number, the percent of departments using the program, the level of compliance. Finally, in the annual report to your senior managers and the C-suite, you want to show cost projections, recommended capital replacement. And I loved, if I got in front of the C-suite, I always wanted to let them know I was a technology leader in the hospital, or make them at least think so. And I would talk about future trends in industry. This, built-in self-testing, remote device monitoring, the industrial internet. All of these things are going to impact on downtime in the future. Talk to them about that so they can start, when they start thinking about instrumentation in the future, you're the person they turn to because they realize you're ahead of the curve. So that's what the report looks like to the C-suite. Now, in summary, we looked at a couple of things. Healthcare relies on technology, can't turn back the clock. Downtime costs vastly exceed repair costs. The 10 to 15% rule of thumb on maintenance agreements is totally irrelevant, and the maintenance agreements are way overpriced. You use insurance only as a stepping stone. Your goal is self-insurance. And then you want to use that hard data, analyze it, be an engineer, and use that data to grow your program. So that's the extent of my talk today, folks. Thank you for attending. Do we have any questions?
Hi, Frank. We do have a couple of questions that came
All right.
in. The first is there a way to get out of contracts that are long-term?
We found, and that's one reason why we had a 3-year program, we found it was incredibly difficult to do that. So you wound up, you don't get to cancel all your contracts the first year. And the long term, unless, let's hope they haven't made a 10-year agreement, that would be kind of embarrassing. But yeah, you're stuck with that. You might be able to negotiate them away, but our experience was we couldn't. We had to live with them. But we did see our costs, our savings go up year after year, which helped the program.
Great. Next question. Why would you not move to direct in-house service after the 3 years? Wouldn't that generate more savings?
Well, and you do, but you want to do it by proving, demonstrating to the department heads the savings. You want the department head to say, wow, this makes sense. I would like you to do this work for me and not them. It just, you know, I see myself in a hospital as a salesman. I have to sell the program. Now, some of you may be much more forceful and can say, okay, we're moving directly to in-house service. I preferred to do it and have the department heads come forward and say, gee, Frank, we would love you to do this. Or have the C-suite say, it makes sense to bring this in-house. It's just much easier, again, with the strength of the data. So that's why I didn't go that route.
Wonderful. Next question. How can we deal with the lack of qualified biomed staff in the local area?
That's very, you know what I did, because I had the same problem in Miami. You know, biomed people hate to move. They love their jobs. They're the best in the world at what they do. They get settled. I did a nationwide study, and I didn't use, unfortunately, any of the biomedical journals. I used a lot of statistics that were available. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I could get it for someone. I used statistics to demonstrate the cost differences between living in Miami and other parts of the world. Then I went to senior management. I didn't bother to go to HR because they usually don't know how to make good decisions in a hurry. I went to senior management and showed them the difference of what I would have to pay to recruit a top technician out of Dallas or out of California, and why I couldn't bring them in. And once they saw that we were severely underpaid on a national level, although we were fine locally, we were high, they increased the pay of all the technicians, and it enabled me to recruit from around the country. But locally, I never had any luck hiring local people, except the ones that got fired from other departments, and I'm not hiring them.
All right, next question is lengthy, so I'll read it pretty slowly for you. If not on service contract, how do you plan for service if the primary vendor cannot respond? We have been told that without service contracts, the vendor will reduce the number of field service engineers. Then we saw what happened. First call with the third-party vendor resulted in excessive costs, but additional 30 hours down. It was a lab analyzer.
Yeah, and so what you're saying is what I hope I'm hearing is the lab analyzer repair company or the lab analyzer manufacturer said, if we don't have a maintenance agreement, we can't support you because we will have to have fewer technicians in the area. That alone tells me that you're paying the entire salary of that person, or almost the entire salary of that person, with the maintenance agreement. No, the only answer is to do two things. You say we're going to go to third party, because obviously they're probably not going to let you train in-house. And you'll have to find a quality third party, and that isn't the easiest thing to do. The insurance company might help you with that, however, though. They can be a good resource. And the other thing is you tell whatever company that is, this is the last device we are ever buying from you. And they go on your blacklist, plain and simple, because there will be no more sales to that company if you don't cooperate. And the letter we sent to all of our service vendors was, we have to reduce our costs, and we would like you to help us in that process. And apparently this company is not cooperating anyway to help the national effort to reduce maintenance costs. So it's kind of a roundabout answer I've given you, but there's no definitive answer. But you do have to tell them we're never buying from you folks again because you don't support your equipment, plain and simple.
All right, next question. How does the cost of training impact overall cost, especially if trained staff leave and you need to retain?
Yeah, the training staff leaves because I got a higher rate of pay for them and imported them to my department, I guess. But no, you have to calculate the training costs into your costs of doing business. In other words, I hope every department has calculated an hourly rate for their service, and their hourly rate is not based upon what you pay your technicians per hour. It's what it costs your department per hour to operate, because you have your overhead. If you're the director, as I was, I didn't do any service. I was just straight overhead and a drag on the department. That had to be calculated into my cost of service. Also calculated into that cost is what it costs to train people. So you might come up, your average technician might get, I don't know, $30 or $40 per hour, but you might find out that the costs, actual per technician, when you factor in their benches and tools and all the other stuff, is more like 75 or 80. And I have no idea what your costs might be. But again, you take your entire budget with the exception of capital equipment that you're buying that year, and you never buy that much in a given year. Your capital, not the hospital's. And you divide that and you get your hourly rate. So you just factor all your training costs and your training budget into that.
Great. I have two additional questions for you. How have you used insurance to level high-cost service situations? This particular attendee self-insures.
Would you read that again? I'm not sure I quite. How?
Absolutely. Have you used insurance to level high-cost service situations?
Well, you know, I never have, but that as I think about it, it might not be a bad idea. That's very creative thinking. I've never thought of that, but it might be if you have one device that skews the numbers every year because they get a very high call service, you might write stop-loss insurance on that. Again, stop-loss may be relatively easy in a hospital because you're spending millions of dollars with an insurance agency, and they're not likely to run away from a stop-loss contract on one device. That's the only answer I can give you off the top of my head. But that's a great idea, and it's a good question.
Then, Frank, the last question I have for you is one of our attendees would like to follow up with you after the call today to discuss this topic further. They've asked if that would be okay.
Yes, certainly. You see on this last slide my email address, frank39@gmail.com. And let me add to that too. I'm now retired. I help out, and I don't charge. So if you contact me and you need assistance, or even if you want me to talk to your CFO, I'll be happy to do that. Anything I can do, particularly to help explode that 10 to 15% cost rule of thumb that has been embedded in our culture for 50-something years. So yes, please feel free to contact me. I don't charge for any service unless I have to go out there and do real hard work. So yeah, thank you for that question. I'm glad to be able to clarify that.
Well, then in closing today, I have a couple of reminders. But first, Frank, I certainly want to thank you for your time and the wisdom that you share with us, not only through the Webinar Wednesday series, but TechNation at the MD Expos. Again, TechNation would like to thank our sponsor today, MedEquip Biomedical. If you'd like additional information about them, you can visit www.medequipbiomedical.com. Also, a survey about today's presentation will appear on your computer screen immediately following the closing of the webinar. Once you complete the survey, you will receive your CE certificate typically within 1 week. If you do not receive the survey, please email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. And remember to register for our next 2 webinars in November. The first Webinar Wednesday will be November 12th, next one November 19th. And you can find more information at imtechnation.com/webinars. Thank you again.